Welcome to the Painting Sloth. In this video, I will show you the basics of painting minis. In the video description, you can find the full recording of me painting this model. This just shows how I apply the techniques to the rest of the model if you are interested. Before beginning any painting, you'll need a paintbrush. It doesn't really matter what brand the paintbrush is, but you do want to make sure it is a round brush and a moderate size. I use brush sizes 2 and 3. A round brush has a very fine point at the tip, which is perfect for fine details. The body of the brush is larger, allowing the brush to hold extra paint. If the brush is too small, it won't hold enough paint, and the paint will dry out faster than you can use it. It may be helpful to have a second, cheap or crappy brush to help you along the painting journey. I use an old brush for getting paint out of the pots and mixing paint so as to preserve my favorite brushes. If you only have one brush, use the bottom of your brush for a similar solution. A wet palette is also a nice tool to have because it prevents your paints from drying out for a longer period of time. You can buy a wet palette, or you can easily make one at home. You just need an extra Tupperware container of any size, a piece of paper towel, and some parchment paper. The paper towel does the same job as the pad in the one I'm showing you, and the parchment paper holds the paint. Another key step before painting is to dilute your paints. Make sure to shake up your paint pot before starting so all the pigments are properly mixed, giving you the best color. Then you can add some paint to your palette using your mixing brush or your brush handle. I'm going to demonstrate various paint mixtures so you know what to look for. This is what it looks like straight out of the pot. Here you can see a distinct thickness to the line along the edges. This is because the paint is too thick. These lines will show up on your model and leave a weird texture that you don't want. To fix this, you can just add some water. Some say you want the consistency to be like skim milk. I don't drink skim milk, so I can't tell you whether that's true or not. I usually just test it on my thumb before I use it. Here is what the diluted paint should look like. You can see it's more transparent, and most importantly, you can see the diluted paint doesn't give any weird textures that would look bad on your model. You can reach the same level of opacity as the original by adding additional layers. If you add too much water, you will get a very watery consistency. You can see the pigments of the paint moving around. This is the key to recognizing your paint is too thin. When pigments move around like this, they can pool in one area, leaving the layer inconsistently covered. While testing the base coat on my thumb or palette, I'm looking for smooth, even coverage and slight transparency from the paint. Before this video, I primed the model using my airbrush and a primer. You can prime models at home or take them to a Games Workshop store and they will help you prime them. I recommend priming in black because black will likely be your shadow color. So if you can't reach certain areas with your brush, like in the armpit or under the armor, the black just looks like a shadow, not a mistake. If you prime models in white or gray and you can't reach a spot, it will be very noticeable. When base coating, you will likely want to use a less precise brush because that's all you need. You're covering most of the model, so you don't really need to be precise. But also, the more you use your nice brush, the less precise the tip will be. So a second brush Helps your nice brushes stay nice. I am painting in nice, thin layers. You can see another benefit of this consistency is that it easily flows into the grooves, cracks, and details on the model, making it really easy to paint in thin, even layers. If you use the base paint thickness, it would actually be harder to paint these details because the paint wouldn't flow properly into the hard to reach areas. While you're painting, you'll want to constantly be taking paint off your brush. I remind myself to get paint off my brush every time I put paint on my brush. You want to do this because when paint dries in the bristles, it destroys the brush. And as I said before, we want to keep our nice brushes nice. While base coating, you don't have to be too precise. However, don't intentionally get paint on places that are not going to be your base coat color. In this case, blue. For example, the insignia on his chest, it won't be blue, so I'm not going to intentionally paint it, but it's more important that I get all the cracks in the armor around the insignia. The paint is very thin, so it will not destroy your model to get a little extra paint on some areas. Once you paint the entire base coat, make sure it dries fully before doing another layer, to prevent tearing up the first coat of paint. Tearing can happen when you run your brush over paint that's only semi-dry. This causes color and texture issues on the model. The second layer of the base coat brings out more of the blue. The next step is shading. And shades are important because they flow into all the cracks and crevices and give you a nice outline for the details on your model. If you're going to get a shade, I highly recommend getting Nuln oil. It's black and works well as a default shadow color. I forgot to record the rest of the shade application for this model, but you can see the difference in color between these two legs. The shade mutes the colors a bit, but also it frames the details better. This is another step where you don't need a detail brush. Because you are applying it over the whole area, your biggest concern is that it's applied evenly and it doesn't pool anywhere. If you notice any pooling, use a clean brush to soak up some of the shade before it dries. Again, ensure the model is fully dry before moving on. A good strat for time management is batch painting. If you have multiple models, you can break the process into steps and do that step on each of the models. First apply the base coat, then by the time you're back to the first model, your paint is dry and you can apply the shade. There is less waiting for paint to dry when you batch paint. So now, because we introduced the shade and the armor is a more muted color, we can actually come back in with the base color to bring back some more of the original color. Here, I only add base color to the top of the arm to create a nice, simple highlight. The final step I'll be showing you today is layering. The difference between layer paints and base paints is that base paints usually cover better and are thicker out of the pot. You don't have to add as much water or even any water to the layer paint to get a good consistency. We are using layer paints to highlight the model. Since the layer paint is more transparent, you can see that the base paint peeps through, allowing the colors to melt seamlessly, giving you smoother transitions. When applying layer paints, you should apply multiple layers, and each layer should cover less of the model than the last layer. This creates a transition from the base color to something between the base and highlight color to the full highlight color. It is important to note that your brush deposits more pigment at the end of the stroke as your brush leaves the model. So, you want to end your brush stroke where you plan on having the most opaque color. Here you can see I actually changed the color that I'm using as my highlight color. This is a very important part of miniature painting. You should actually like how the colors look on your model. In this case, I didn't like how different the highlight color was from my base color. So, I chose a blue that was a little darker and a little less vibrant. After using these techniques, this is what your model will look like. Technically, this model here is tabletop ready. To make yours tabletop ready, you would have to do some work on the base, which I will cover in a future video. In my next video, I will continue to paint this model with slightly more advanced techniques, which will elevate your model beyond tabletop ready. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. If you want to see more tutorials like this, you can subscribe to my channel here. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, and live on YouTube or Twitch. If you have something specific you want to learn, comment below and I will do my best to show you how to push your models beyond tabletop ready.